Welcome back to Edible Education 101. I'm Gary Sposito. Tonight we're going to have the first of our double feature lectures, or there are several of these this semester. This is the first one, in which we have two presenters. And the way we'll work it is to take questions after both presenters have given their lectures. So we'll hold your questions until then, and we'll do it just like we did the last time, which is we'll have mics for you guys here in the audience, and we'll be taking questions from social media as well. So we'll handle it that way. We'll get a mic to you right away when you have questions. So do ask your questions. We want you to do that. Also, I want to welcome the audience in the Brower Center. We also welcome your questions. Hello again. And to say once more that we're very grateful for the sponsorship of the Edible Schoolyard Project in making it possible to have that audience in the Brower Center. It's very important to us. And now I ask you to please turn off your cell phones, sit back and relax and enjoy the presentations. So I'm going to go first, and then I'll introduce our second speaker after that. Now, tonight we're talking about health essentially throughout the entire evening, but in maybe two different ways, although they are related. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the health of the planet. And this is in the context that Michael provided last time, Michael Pollan, which I thought was excellent. He laid out the agenda for the course pretty well. So if you were taking careful notes, you really got most of what you need to know about where this course is going. And Michael did give you examples of a number of important adverse ecological impacts of agriculture the way it's done today, the way it's done conventionally. What I'm going to do is maybe a little more than fill in the blanks, but what I'm going to do is to try to give you some detail, a kind of Cook's tour of the ecological impacts that agriculture is having on a global scale. And you may find that some of the news is new to you. You may find that some of the news is not so great. But you'll see that there are very good people like yourselves thinking about solutions to these problems. They are very urgent and pressing problems in many ways, as you're going to see. Now, to begin with, this opening slide has a kind of picture of the transition over time on Earth, both in the continents and in the oceans, of agriculture's impact on the environment in general. This is from a paper published a couple of weeks ago in Science magazine, which was actually about the prospect of large-scale extinctions in the ocean. Below it is a quote which is from a New York Times op-ed which was written early last month, which was actually about the collapse of the Atlantic cod fishery, but it's really more general than that, as you can see from the quote. I hope you've had time to read it. It's a kind of a somber statement. And really what it is also is a good way to summarize the assigned reading for this time, for this lecture, which is a chapter from a book that Michael Pollan mentioned by Wendell Berry, which is from this book, The Unsettling of America. The chapter title is exactly the same as the title of my lecture. And Berry takes you through some ideas of the time, which were, and this is about 40 years ago, in which there was just an emerging consciousness of these kinds of issues that he was bringing to the attention very well for everyone who read his work. And this states, in a sense, it's my conclusion too. It states where we are right now. We've got a problem here, and this is getting to the heart of the moral dilemma. It's not the practical, technological, or scientific dilemma, but it is the moral dilemma that we face. We haven't figured this one out yet. So that's what one should be thinking about, perhaps, as we go through what I have to say and what Professor Nessel has to say tonight. We need to figure this one out. Now, I think I owe to you some kind of explanation of why I think there's an ecological crisis, or why Wendell Berry might have thought there was an ecological crisis, and why that crisis is one for agriculture. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to spend some time right now telling you why I think there's an ecological crisis. In the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a number of papers published, articles published in respectable journals, which are consensus reviews of where things stand in respect to biodiversity. global biodiversity. Biodiversity just means literally the biological diversity, and you can think of it of species, of how many different species, how rich is the speciation in an ecosystem or something like that. It's perfectly fine to think that way. Now, there are two things that these very recent reviews have done, and they're actually given to you as references here if you want to take a look at them. One of them is to establish that biodiversity plays a very important role in the functioning of ecosystems and in their stability, or better, their resilience against disturbances. So that's the first thing that's true. Biodiversity does seem to be one of the key aspects of an ecosystem, which allows it to function in a way that we would call normal or healthy, as well as allowing it to recover whenever something happens that's sudden, for example, a sudden storm or the onslaught of invasive pests or whatever it may be, some sudden disturbance. So the resilience or the stability, they're both pretty much saying the same thing, both seem to be tied to biodiversity. There's this first article, Biodiversity Loss and Its Impact on Humanity, goes into great detail with all of the good experimental evidence we have now from many, many studies to show that this is true. So biodiversity is important to the way that the natural world operates. That's the first point to be made. Now, these ecosystems in our world are something which we regard as useful. And that means, therefore, that they provide us services. And these services are typically categorized as provisioning and regulating. Provisioning services, for example, 60% of the developed water supply in California comes from the ecosystems in the Sierra Nevada range. That's a provisioning service of those ecosystems. They provide us with 60% of our water supply in California. About half of the water that flows into the San Francisco Bay Delta system is coming from the Sierra Nevada. So that's a provisioning. A regulatory ecosystem service, that would be something like carbon sequestration. Carbon being sequestered in the plant biomass or in the soil and so forth. Why is that important? Because we all know that carbon getting into the atmosphere has been a problem. And of course, ecosystems with higher plants in them sequester that carbon for us. That's a service which mitigates climate change. And in fact, the terrestrial ecosystems take up about half of the carbon, the excess carbon that we put in the atmosphere all the time from fossil fuel burning. So that's what's meant here. Now, the important point was that there's good evidence now that biodiversity also is important to those ecosystem services being there when you need them, where you need them. So that's another important aspect. Okay, so that's part of the picture. That good recent work that's been reviewed by a large group of scientists, mostly ecologists and conservation biologists, now is pointing to the fact that biodiversity is essential to the way the world works and essential to the services that we all expect and enjoy from the ecosystems around us, the wild ones in particular. Now, what's wrong? Well, what's wrong is that the extinction rates are going way, way up. The second paper, which has a large number of authors published very recently, shows in fact that by very careful work we can deduce that the extinction rate now on Earth for all sorts of species, birds, amphibians, and mammals in particular, but also fish and so forth, these extinction rates are about 1,000 times higher than they were before we showed up on the planet. Maybe more significant to all of us is that they're about 3 times higher than they were before 1900. So they've been going up, and they're seriously going up. A large number of species are threatened. And they have begun to conclude that the major cause of the problem for extinctions is the destruction of natural habitats. Natural habitats, that's where the creatures live, that's where the plants grow. Let me give you a little example. Let's take the Canadian boreal forest. Boreal just means the region of the planet which is above about 50 degrees latitude north to about 70 degrees. It's a big forest. It's actually 1/4 of the wild forest left on Earth is in the Canadian boreal forest. Boreal just means the northern region. It comes from the name of the Greek god of the north, Greek god, but it's the Roman name. At any rate, the point is that these ecosystems have a lot of birds in them. They are habitat for about 1/2 of the land bird population on Earth. And these birds migrate. Every year, 3 to 5 billion birds fly out of the boreal forests in Canada, and they come to lower North America, they come to Central America, and they come to South America. That's where they spend their time. And guess what? Their habitat is being destroyed. Millions upon millions of acres of their habitat is being destroyed. Right now, large numbers of those species are threatened simply because the habitat to where they migrate, thousands of miles, is being destroyed. That's the kind of thing that leads to extinction. We have the same problem in the Amazon forest with respect to the species that are there, all on their own, not migrating and so forth. So it's a big deal. It's something we worry about. It's something that conservation biologists are very worried about. So that's the ecological crisis in a nutshell, that we're seeing mass mortality events, die-offs. There's a very recent paper, one of my colleagues in environmental science policy and management was one of the co-authors, that these massive die-offs are showing up much more often now, not always understood, but they're showing up. And extinction rates are very, very high. Extinction rates being high means a major loss, a dramatic loss of biodiversity. Without that biodiversity, the system doesn't work, and it can't provide the services that we all depend upon. It's as simple as that. So that's the crisis. And most people have concluded that the destruction of natural habitat is the main cause of the problem. So now this is where agriculture comes in. Here's a map of the globe. And in fact, here, up at the top here, you can see that boreal forest in blue. There it is. They're shown at the top. This is showing you some major types of what are called biomes in ecology. A biome is a class of ecosystems which share similar climate and vegetation. So there's a tropical forest biome, a boreal forest biome, a desert biome, and so on. It's just a name. Anyway, this is the Earth as it might have looked before agriculture came. And this is the current situation with respect to cropland and pasture and rangeland. Now, agriculture consists of two parts. Cropland is part of it, and so is rangeland and pasture land. They're both agriculture. Now, this color coding is showing you where the croplands are the most intense. The deeper red-brown, the more intense. And I think you can see rather straightforwardly that a majority of the croplands are really in the global north. The equator is about right here, running through Indonesia and across Africa and the upper part of South America. So most of the croplands are in the global north, intense stuff. But most of the rangelands are, pretty much most of them are in the global south, as you can see here. Right now, 12% of the global land area is taken up with crops. This is the ice-free area. So we're not talking about anything that's under ice all the time, although that's changing as we speak, isn't it? And 26% of the global land area is in rangeland or pasture land. So together, that's 38% of the global land area already given over to agriculture. That's nearly 40% of the global land area. That's a lot. The amount of land area that was freed up by the last melting of the glaciers, 12,000 years ago, that was 30%. So agriculture has actually taken up more than that, more than the amount of land that was freed up by the glaciers melting. Another thing that you should know is about 1/3 of the cropland is actually not used to grow food for us. It's used to grow food for animals. Animal food. So if you do the math here, about 1/3 of that 12%, that's 4%. You add this to the 26, which of course is all for animals, and you get 30. You divide the 30 by 38, what do you get? That about 70% of our agricultural land is used for raising animals.